Today I want to get you ready for the new year with today's video all about how to create a successful manga in 2022. Now my first tip for creating a successful manga in 2022 is to establish a realistic plan. If you want to get as much done possible in the new year on your manga, it's important to create a realistic plan that not only ensures you get a lot done, but also ensures that you don't get burnt out in the process. So in order to establish a realistic plan, I first recommend that you should look at the time you already have in your day. Now, if you're working in the daytime and if you have other commitments, make sure you write that down in your schedule as well. Work out a dedicated amount of time where you can sit down and realistically work on your manga. And rather than thinking about how many pages can I complete in a day or what part of the process can I complete every day, it might be more healthy and realistic to think of a specific time and put in as much effort towards your manga as you can in that specific time every day. You may find that you actually become more inspired in these times because you are dedicating your time in those specific moments to work on your book. My second tip is put a twist on what is normal in your genre. So if you're writing in a genre that might be a more commonly used genre, say shonen or maybe something more action-based, you really want to look at what's popular in that genre right now and think about how you could put a spin on that and create something a little bit different. I recommend looking at what cliches or character types or what types of storylines are most common in those genres and think about how you could twist it around and create something a little bit different. While you're focusing on what makes that genre really important and showing that genre in your book, you're also thinking about what you can do that's a little bit different and what you could do to stand out from the crowd. And that's really important if you want your manga to be a success in 2022. If you want your manga to stand out in 2022, it's also important to create dire stakes in your book that your characters will want to fight for. You'll notice how the most popular stories out there tend to be stories that are very high stakes, and the reason why they are always so high stakes is because these are the types of stories that an audience really will want to follow to see what will happen to the characters and what's going to happen to the story. So if you want to create a high-stakes story, you first of all need to consider what are your character's goals, and the goals are really important. Giving your character a strong personal goal will be the thing they strive towards in the story, and this goal has to be something that your audience will care about as well. And second of all, you need to ensure that your protagonist is someone that your audience will care about. And when your audience cares about your character, they will care enough to keep reading more to see what is going to happen to them. And finally, to really add those high stakes, you need to ensure that they cannot fail their goal. So you need to give them a reason why they must succeed. Basically, you need to think about the consequences behind them failing, and if they fail, there needs to be a dire consequence that will occur because they did not reach their goals. And these consequences are the stakes of the story. This is what your character must overcome in order to succeed in their goals. So for example, maybe your character's goals are to find a special object that is going to protect or save a character who is dear to them. However, the stakes in the story are the fact that the character does not have very long to live, and so your character is on a time limit. And if they do not find this artifact in time, this character that they care about is going to pass away. So the high stakes are the fact that your character is on a time limit and they really don't know how much time they have left. My fourth tip is focus on what makes your art style unique. One of the best things about creating a manga is the fact that you can really show your unique art styles, and keep in mind that no matter how you draw things, your art style is going to be unique because you are the one who created it. But it's important to really focus on what makes your art style unique. So don't look at the popular mangas that are out there and try and copy that art style in your own, because that is not really going to work if you want your manga to stand out in 2022. So it can be very helpful to look at some of your manga pages and maybe practice with a few manga pages first and think about what makes my art style unique. And that could be in the character's eyes, their clothing, their poses, the way they move around on the page. And so these are just little things that can make your pages stand out a lot more. And when you notice the things that make your art style stand out more, think about how you can emphasize those aspects to make them stand out even more, because these are the things that will make your manga even more recognizable. I think a good example of this is Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, because this is a specific art style that I don't really see a lot, and I feel like this is one of the aspects that really made it stand out a lot in its genre. Not only does it have an amazing story, but the art style itself is something that is very memorable, and no matter how you see the art style, you'll always recognize that that art style is from that series. My fifth tip is add a story problem in each chapter. So when there are problems in a story, it forces the characters to try and solve those problems. So if you find that your story is maybe feeling a little bit tedious or it is slower in some areas, consider if you can add a problem that your characters must overcome before they can continue. The only time when there should really be no problems in your story is at the very end when you're tying things up. In all the areas before that, there always should be something that they're trying to work through. Now keep in mind as well that the problems don't have to necessarily be something terrible. They could just be small problems. Maybe two characters aren't really getting along very well and your character wants to help them. Or maybe your character has lost something important and they need to find it. So really consider what small conflicts or problems you could add to your story to keep things interesting. And the more you add things to keep things interesting in your book, the more your audience will be more likely to want to keep reading more to see what will happen next. My sixth tip is make a protagonist that your audience will care about. The protagonist will be one of the most important characters in the story, and for good reason. The protagonist's goals will likely be the main goals of the story, and your protagonist will be the character that your audience will see the story through. So the protagonist is the one who is really telling the story. If you want your book to be a success in 2022, then you need to create a protagonist that your audience will care about and want to read more about. Now, by creating a protagonist that your audience cares about, I don't necessarily mean that your protagonist has to be a good character. For example, in Death Note, Light is clearly not a good character, but lots of people want to read about Light's story because he is interesting to read about. So basically, by having a protagonist that your audience cares about, it doesn't mean that they care about them in a likable way, but they can care about your protagonist in a way that they will want to see what will happen to your protagonist next. Regardless of whether your protagonist is a good or a bad character, you should still create a protagonist that your audience is going to want to read more about. So give them qualities that really make them persistent in your story, make them interesting, and make them someone who really drives the story forward. The reason why this is so important is that when you create a character that your audience cares about, your audience is going to want to know what will happen to that character next, which will keep them reading more to see what will happen. So in order to create a successful manga, it's important that you create a protagonist that is interesting to read about, interesting enough that they continue to drive the story and keep things interesting from beginning to end. My seventh tip is create characters who are interesting when paired together. A good way to keep your story interesting is to add characters to your scenes that are really interesting and entertaining when they are paired together. Think about how you can put two characters together who may make an interesting scene. For example, I see it quite a lot when you have a more positive natured character with a more negative natured character in a scene and they are forced to work together in the scene. And this creates some really funny moments when these two characters with very different personalities are trying to work together. In another example, you might have a character who is very motivated and goal-driven, and the other character is more stubborn and resilient, and these characters are trying to work together. So think about how you can add characters together with opposing personalities or opposing goals, and think about how you can force these characters to work together in a scene in order to create a scene that is more entertaining or sometimes comical. And finally, my eighth tip is focus on what makes you different. The most successful series out there are series that did something different from the other series out there. They're not series that became successful because they were like something else. They're series that really stood apart on their own and created a story that is very memorable for years to come. So think about with your book how you can do something a bit different with yours. Think about what the unique qualities are and how you can stand out for really being yourself. Not to compare yourself to other creators in the journey and instead focus mostly on how you can be the best creator you can be. I think when you create something that you are truly passionate about, I think it really reflects in the story and it overall makes the manga much more meaningful. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and I will see you in the next video. Bye!